Hi everyone, it's Toby, and today we're going to be sketching this, a lovely scene which comes from a sort of moderately complex reference photo, but by breaking it down into shapes, by starting to understand what abstraction and abstract art means, we can create a scene which is both abstract but also very recognisable for the lovely little village that it's depicting, all whilst just using simple supplies. So we've got my TWSBI pen, but any fountain pen or fine liner would do. Just using a couple of simple and reasonably cheap travel brushes today, and my selection of colours. And mostly what we'll be using is the muck, the kind of stuff which is left over from our other sketches. Instead of having to use new paints and new paints, we can produce really great art whilst keeping the price down by not having to throw away and clean out this muck from our palette. And with that, let's start our little sketching experience today. Won't be long, 10-15 minutes, and we'll have produced a really fun, vibrant little sketch, almost exactly like this. I'm going to just be using my TWSBI Diamond 580 pen today, and inside I've got Lottie sketch ink. Just trying this ink out a little bit more, comparing it to my normal carbon ink. And let's just see what happens. Now this scene could be a bit scary, a bit complicated, but then if we just see all the shapes, I'm sure that things will come together. So let's start with the obvious shape, shall we? This rather dramatic spire going right up into the sky. Now, it's got lots of sides, which is complicated and scary, but we can start off by ignoring it and just turning it into a cone. And maybe later, if we want, we can find some of those other sides, other shapes, and make it into something different. Coming forwards, we've got these lovely little chimney pots. Then we've got a sort of triangle here. Now, the reason I love shapes is because they simplify a scene, because they make it possible to capture it rather quickly, and because they're sort of the first step in abstracting a scene. So abstraction is where we focus less on total realism and more on the sort of shapes, the form, maybe the colours. And for me, just being able to focus on the shapes means you can both be abstract, be loose, but also it means that you can, of course, get something which resembles the scene rather easily. Now, continuing the shapes, I often like coming up the roofs like this because it just makes for a nice silhouette under which we can start building in the shape. So we can build in all these little window shapes. We can build in these doors which we can see peeking out. Can come up, and we can more easily just get the sort of various proportions of different things slightly more correct. I find for me it's easier if I have a silhouette to work underneath. My proportions tend to work out a little bit better. Down here we can sort of see some complex things going on, so instead of trying to pretend we can see exactly what's going on, just find that there's a clear line and a chimney. If we put that in, that is what's in the photo. We could pretend that we can see clearly all the roofs, but we can't. So instead of pretending something that we can't actually see, let's just be fair on ourselves and fair on the image and just see what we can actually see. It's the idea of not imagining things, not making things up. You can make things up, but be aware you're making things up instead of trying to pretend or trying to think that you're drawing something which is there when it's actually not. In the background again, we've got another clear line coming across, and then also the last thing I think is really important in the top of our scene is this little chimney pot. I say little, it's a rather large chimney pot, which is why I think it's important. We could pop a couple more windows in here, finish off some more of this house, and then we got this kind of decision. Do we want these vans and cars in? I actually think in this scene, often they don't add much. In this scene, they do add quite a lot. So let's just do them. And again, they're scary, but they're just shapes. So if we look, the windscreen is basically a rectangle. It's a rectangle with slightly angled edges. Then it comes to the bonnet. It's another rectangle or parallelogram because it's got angled edges. Really important just to get the lights in because they tell you so much about what this set of shapes is. Similarly, something like the number plate. And then coming on these little wheel shapes. On the side of the van, we've kind of got basically a square, rectangle, something like that. And coming down here. And I always say shapes, and then often I don't name the shapes accurately because it's not actually about knowing exactly what the shape is. It's just the idea of simplifying. It's the idea of not trying to draw a van, but trying to separate it out into constituent shapes and have them in your mind, even if you can't name exactly what they are. You know, I say this is a parallelogram. I might be wrong. I might be calling it the wrong thing. It's some kind of rectangle with wonky edges. And as long as I can think in those terms, I'll be able to get it on my scene. This van in the background's a bit easier because it's on its side, much less perspective to deal with. So we can almost just continuous line draw it, and we'll probably get it accurate enough, which we don't have to think too hard about individual shapes, breaking it down. Here in perspective, need to break it down a lot more to make it sketchable. This car in the front, why not? Let's just add it in. We'll have it falling off the edge of the image, just like it is in our reference. And we, again, just find those shapes. There's loads of perspective going on, so we need to be clear. Look, this is kind of a triangle. Got this wing mirror. That's another important part, which instantly makes this into a car. Look, as soon as I add in that wing mirror, it's a car, even though it's just not a car yet. Coming down, we can find these lights, just put them in about the right place. So you can map the angle between the wing mirror and the light, and that will tell you where to go. You could also draw down from the windscreen, and that will tell you where to go. Either way, you just find simple ways of measuring approximately where to pop the lights. And with that, that's the car sort of falling off the edge, just like in our reference photo. And anything else that's important at this stage, maybe a couple of little touches. So we've got these little trees in the background, and we've got these trees here. Now these are just nice loose frames, gentle frames to the edge of our scene. Similarly, we can just bring this tree in as well. And now we've got our scene neatly in the middle of our page. We've got plenty of room for colour, clear shapes, and we can finish for now with our pen. Of course, after our pen comes the colours. So I've got my normal set of watercolours here. You can see I've been using it. I often don't clean things out because I like to have these colours in front of me. So for example, instead of going straight into one of these blues, what I could do is go, you know what, the blue I was using before, this little mix, I can't tell you exactly what it is, but that's a good place to start. It looks like the right kind of slightly moody, off primary blue, just a bit darker than a primary blue. And again, we could bring in a bit more of this sort of mucky neutral blue, and that's going to start just getting that feel of some of these clouds in there as well. Now at the beginning of this, I'm using my bigger brush, my size 10. This is just a simple, cheap travel brush. You can see actually I've got a little flyaway hair there. That's probably because when I put it together, it didn't slide in properly. So the travel brush is going like this, and I probably trapped it. So what I might try and do is just see if a little bit of trappings. No, I think it's not going to work, but never mind. What we're going to do for this sketch is we'll be careful of this hair, and then when I pop it down later, I'm going to be careful to lie it down so that the hair naturally flattens out as it dries. But don't let these little things stop you from sketching. I can just hold it this way round. I can even use it just for a bit of extra texture. You know, it doesn't really matter if you've got these little flyaway hairs when we're just doing some lovely loose light sketching. Adding in there's just, this is a nice bright bit of cobalt blue, because this sky, it's moody, but it's also got some really bright blues. And I can tell you this weekend was, it was moody with some bright blues. We went for a little walk to go for a dinner one evening, and we came back absolutely soaking. And then 5 minutes later, it was bright blue skies and really sunny and bright, even at sort of 7 p.m. because it's in our in summer at the moment in Britain. Anyway, less about my holiday. So what I've done now, I've got this nice simple moody sky, little bits of white, and I'm going to just bring that down. And through this complicated area, I don't know if you get the sense, the same sense that I do, but I sense that this area is just a little bit darker, less clear. There's some shadows going on. So I can just bring down these blues. I could even, to liven up a shadow, lovely touch of cobalt, even just touch that bright blue in there. I know that's not real, but again, we are abstracting. And that for me starts connecting things, and it starts pulling features out. It makes things obvious. So look at how this van's just come to life because it's now surrounded by that kind of negative space. I might try something else a bit abstract. Let's try a little bit of a purple. So I've got a Perylene Violet here. And I pop that into some of these road shadows, thus starting to separate the road from the sky, because otherwise they're all the same colour. We can then use this Perylene Violet on this house. This one, this sort of mucky, lilac-y, well, violet now house. We've got a nice bright blue house as well. So let's just take our cobalt. I know it's not a cobalt blue. Let's take our cobalt. Now this is going to spill out because this page is wet. But I'm happy with that. I'm happy with these colours blending and merging. If you're not happy with that, take a different approach. Wait for it to dry. Keep your colours less wet. You know, there's lots of ways around being this loose. But for me, it's a great way to sketch because it means that the art takes care of itself. There's just magic happening on the page. Nothing to do with me. And I don't have to work too hard to create something fun at least. Now, what are we missing? At the moment, we've got a very sort of single toned image, all blues and purples and greys. So I want to warm this up somewhere. And there are a couple of options for that. We've got roofs. We could imply some brighter reds in the roofs. We've got this little phone box in the distance. We can apply some reds there. We've also got things like the lights of the cars and the vans. So certainly I'm going to start there, just little touches of lights, and I can bring them down as well and let those lights sort of spill out onto our page. That just warms up the whole image. It makes it more two-dimensional. With this yellow now in play, well, let's use that yellow on this kind of Tudory pub. And I might keep this separate in most places and then just let it leak in one place. Again, just connecting things. We also want to leave lots of white space. So I'm actually probably just going to stop there for now. Give us a little splash. And these splashes of water will hopefully just create some really lovely texture. Maybe even some splashes of dark. And maybe even, to feel that warmth a bit more, some splashes of yellow balancing out on either side. Now we'll just let this dry and we'll come back and we'll start adding some bolder colours and a bit of restructuring with our pen. And here we are, mostly dry. So what I'm going to do is swap to my other brush, my smaller brush. And as I said before, I'm just going to lay down this brush so that it's flat and it's going to hopefully fix that bristle for me. Next, we got our bold colours. That's why the small brush is helpful. With our bold colours, we can start picking out specific high value areas, specific shadows, specific punches of bright colour. So we could even take a more orangey yellow from up here in my palette and just create a bit more of a punch in this kind of Tudory pub. We might want to balance that out with a sort of, I'm going to take some quinacridone sienna, a bit of that Perylene mix I've been using, and start suggesting some of these kind of lines in the pub just coming across. It's going to be a wet on wet at the top and wet on dry at the bottom, so we'll get all sorts of textures and things emerging. And when we come back shortly with our pen to restructure, then we can make sense of some of this sort of chaos which this will produce. We can also purposefully soften some of those lines so that it's not too hard, too standing out. Over here we've got this lovely house. Let's amp up this blue again. It's a lovely place to get real punch of colour. And we might leave some negative space here for the windows, which again we can come back and show off with our pen. Coming along, let's use that same blue just to fill in this negative space a tiny bit. See this lovely sign? So this sign could come over the top of our car and it will just make that car stand out a little bit. And just to make this sign less sort of rectangular, blunt, I'm going to come and soften. Softening is just where we loosen that edge and let the colours flow a little bit. What else could we do? Well, there's quite a lot going on underneath this pub on the left again, isn't there? So why not just come in and just, again, we'll create some little havoc with some darker shadows, bring those shadows up a little bit and under this fan. Just making sure, again, we don't want all these extra hard lines of colour. So we soften those lines out, we get things blending and merging together. And just like that, in a simple sketch like this, that's probably enough for now. That's probably enough of our bolder colours. We're going to now add our pen before coming back for the tiny last touches. Now I'm going to be brave or foolish. We'll work out which one it is as this goes. And I'm going to go straight for it, even whilst this is wet. Because often when you're out and about sketching, that's what you have to do. You don't have enough time to just sit and wait for everything to dry. So first I'm going to make more of this delightful tower. And even, see how it's got a little rooster on the top? Well, let's add something to suggest that. And that just brings it forward. Even though it's in the back, it's kind of so key to our scene, isn't it? So having it come forward with a bold line, I think is a great idea. It works for me anyway, and that's, given it's my art, that's what's important. That's what I want to enjoy. Similarly, we can come around a lot of our kind of, I called it the silhouette lines. We'll come around the silhouette line and we can just pull apart the houses from the trees, from the sky, just by, again, creating this clear delineating mark, this clear line which separates things out. Underneath, let's start adding a little bit of contrast. So in these windows, we can hatch. And if we hatch closely together in places, that ink's going to pool, and it's going to be more than hatching. It's going to be sort of blacking in, blotting in. That's okay. You can hatch here as well. And I don't mind, again, I know that my page is wet, so I don't mind that my ink is obviously going to run in a couple of places. That's fine. Absolutely fine by me. Now we can pull apart some of these shapes and lines that we found earlier as well. And over here, we've got our sort of Tudory building. We'll get these windows nice and dark, and then we can just use our ink, again, almost like a wet on wet bit of ink. So we can just softly suggest some of these beams. Not everywhere, but just in a few places we can suggest them, making sense, as we said, of that chaos we added earlier. Underneath we've got our telephone box, and don't worry, I have not forgotten about him. He will be getting fleshed out a bit more in a moment when we add our colours, our last really punchy final touches. Of course, our van, he needs to come forward. So let's just do that nice and quickly. Keeping it loose, don't want it too bold, too overpowering. This chappy as well. Keep that continuous line feel. And we can even, actually, thinking about it, let's just hatch in these windows so that all the windows across the scene have a similar feel, this similar hatched feel. This little patch of blue we can suggest, and again that little bit of hatching here. And just like that, I think our ink is done, finally done. So the last bit, as I was saying, are those real punchy final little touches, those finishing touches. Now I have not forgotten about our chappy over here, our telephone box. He is going to be a punch of warmth coming right forward. Now we need to balance this red. At the moment that red just draws the eye immediately. That might be great if you want to make an absolute feature. It's a bit clashing for me, but if you want to make it an absolute feature, you can leave your colours just in one place like that. For me, I'm going to now find something to balance that red. And I mean literally balance, somewhere else opposite it. And for me, as you know, if you follow my channel at all, I love a red chimney, so why not a few red chimneys, a couple of splashes, and even we mentioned earlier that things like the rear of cars can have a little red touch. And that's probably enough. We could even just do little touches in a couple of places. Tiny bit more yellow, probably brighter yellow, maybe get it straight out of my pan this time instead of using the sort of mucky stuff in the palette, just to brighten up some of these headlights. And maybe even, I think, since we've got these lovely red splashes, more yellow splashes, again, just as a sort of balancing act. And like that, we are done. So, don't forget to sign it. You could date it if you wanted. If you've enjoyed this, leave me a comment, subscribe, and if you like, you can come join me on my free course. It's called 10 Days of Sketching, totally free, 10 little bite-sized lessons to get you sketching, learning, and feeling more confident in a loose sketching style like this. So thank you everyone for watching my little sketching videos. If you enjoy my content, please do subscribe to my channel because it makes me really, really happy. Thanks again.